They knew you, or at least you thought they did. They knew your fears, your flaws, your past. They saw your trust as an opportunity, not a bond. And when they broke it, they didn't flinch. No warning, no guilt, just silence. Just the sound of something cracking inside you that you couldn't quite name. It wasn't the act that hurt the most. It was the calm in their eyes, the quiet way they moved on, as if you were a chapter they skipped. No closure, no explanation, just a clean cut. People talk about heartbreak, but betrayal has a different flavor. It doesn't just hurt, it changes you. Your brain tries to make sense of it, but nothing adds up. You start doubting yourself. What did I miss? Was I too soft, too trusting, too open? The questions keep coming, and none of them have answers that feel fair. The hardest part is the silence. After it all, the way the world keeps spinning like nothing happened. You wake up with your chest caved in, but the sun still rises. The notifications still come. People still laugh around you, not knowing you're unraveling. That's the cruelty of betrayal. It's invisible. The mind rewires itself after betrayal. It goes into protection mode. Some call it emotional coldness. Others call it numbness. But really it's survival. Your nervous system doesn't care about fairness. It only cares about safety. So you stop reaching out. You stop talking. You stop feeling safe in places that once felt warm. You become smaller in rooms, quieter. Not because you're weak, but because you're watching, learning, guarding. This kind of pain doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up in small ways, canceling plans, locking your phone, overthinking every message. Trust becomes a currency you no longer carry. Even the kindest faces look suspicious. It's not paranoia, it's memory. Your body remembers what it felt like to be cut while you were reaching out with open arms. The people around you might not get it. They'll tell you to move on, forgive, let go. But they didn't feel what you felt. They didn't watch someone love them on Monday and lie on Friday. They didn't have to clean up a mess they didn't make, all while pretending they're okay. You're not bitter, you're wounded. There's a difference. Bitterness poisons. Wounds remind. They keep you alert. They keep you aware of where not to step again. And somewhere in that quiet chaos, something changes. You stop waiting for apologies. You stop explaining yourself. You stop opening doors that always slam in your face. You begin to disappear, not physically, but emotionally. Your presence becomes unpredictable. Your availability becomes rare. This isn't revenge. It's a response, a necessary one. When pain carves into you, you either collapse or you harden. You chose the latter, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. The world didn't pause for your healing, so you learned to carry the weight quietly. But there's strength in silence. There's power in not reacting. There's something unnerving about someone who no longer seeks approval or connection from those who used them. You weren't built for this, but you adapted. You learned to breathe through the storm, to stand still while your world fell apart. And somehow, you're still here. Colder, yes, but stronger. Not because you asked for it, but because betrayal didn't give you a choice. You became unreachable, not to punish anyone, but to protect the only thing you have left, your peace. It starts with trust, quiet, unnoticed at first. Trust is built in slow moments, shared thoughts, vulnerable pauses, small signs that say, "You're safe with me." You don't even think about it when it's forming. It feels natural, human, but trust is fragile. It takes time to build and seconds to break. And when it breaks, something inside you doesn't just hurt, It collapses. Betrayal isn't just someone doing you wrong. It's someone you let in, someone you believed would protect your heart, someone who knew your story and used it against you. That's what cuts the deepest, not just what they did, but who they were to you when they did it. It's the fact that you didn't expect it. You couldn't have. If you had, you wouldn't be this broken. People often confuse betrayal with conflict. They're not the same. Conflict can be fixed. Betrayal lives in silence. It grows in the dark, behind your back, under false smiles. And when the truth finally reaches you, it's never clean. It's messy, loud inside your head, and impossible to process all at once. Your brain goes into shock. The emotional system floods. You're left questioning what was real. That's the first psychological blow, doubt. Doubt spreads fast after betrayal. You doubt the person, the memories, the moments. Then you start doubting yourself. Why didn't I see it? Why did I trust them? You retrace every conversation, every message, every look. You become an investigator of your own life, trying to catch what you missed. But the truth is, you didn't miss it because you were naive. You missed it because you loved. You believed. That was never the crime. Your brain experiences betrayal the same way it processes trauma. The body tightens, cortisol rises, the nervous system goes into survival mode. Studies show that emotional betrayal activates the same regions in the brain as physical pain. That's why it hurts in your chest. That's why your appetite fades, your sleep breaks, your thoughts spiral. It's not just emotional. It's physical. It's biological. Trust isn't just emotional comfort. It's psychological safety. It tells the brain that it's okay to rest, that it doesn't need to watch every move. When that's taken away suddenly, the brain becomes hyper-vigilant. You start noticing things you didn't before. The tone of someone's voice, their pauses, their eyes. You begin reading everything like it's a code. You're not paranoid. You're just wounded. The brain learns from betrayal. And one of the first lessons it learns is to never fully let go again. This kind of pain stays with you. Long after the person is gone, their shadow lingers. You walk into new relationships with a guarded heart. You smile with caution. You love in parts, never whole. You think you've healed, but one random memory, one song, one scent brings everything back. That's the trap of betrayal. It teaches the body to never feel too safe again. Some betrayals are loud, affairs, lies, stolen things. Others are silent, abandonment, broken promises, emotional neglect. But the quiet ones hurt just as much, sometimes more. Because with silence, there's no closure. You don't get a reason. You don't get a goodbye. You just get a shift. One day they were present. The next, they're a stranger. No explanation, just distance. And you're left to make peace with the empty space.
What most people don't understand is that betrayal doesn't just break your connection with someone. It fractures your connection with the world, with how you view people, safety, love. It shifts your baseline. Where there was once ease, now there's suspicion. You start expecting pain in places that once brought you comfort. Even kindness feels suspicious. You start asking yourself, what do they really want? It's not that you've become bitter. You've just become careful. People will tell you to forgive, to let it go. But they weren't there when the walls fell. They didn't see the version of you who couldn't get out of bed, the version who read old messages, trying to make sense of it all. They didn't hear the questions that wouldn't stop. They only see the shell you built afterward, the coldness, the silence, the distance. And they call it unhealthy. They call it walls. But they don't understand. They're not walls to keep others out. They're fences to keep yourself in, to keep you from bleeding again. Psychologically, betrayal often triggers identity loss. You start questioning who you are, because if they betrayed you, were you too much? Not enough? Was your love real? Were the laughs fake? That's what betrayal does. It rewrites your memories. It turns everything into a lie. It makes you feel stupid for trusting, even though trust was never the mistake. Children who are betrayed by their parents or caregivers carry that wiring into adulthood. They learn that the people closest to them are also the ones who hurt them most. Adults betrayed by partners, friends, or mentors experience similar imprinting. The brain starts equating closeness with danger. The closer someone gets, the more anxious you become. That's trauma. That's your nervous system protecting you, even when it hurts. Healing from betrayal isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about confronting how real it was. It's about accepting that the person you trusted was not who you thought they were. That's the hardest part. Not what they did, but the fact that they did it while pretending to care. That contradiction breaks something sacred. You stop answering quickly. You stop opening up so easily. You start watching, measuring, waiting. You move slower, not because you're cold, but because you've learned what it costs to misplace your trust. You no longer confuse smiles for safety. You no longer feel guilty for pulling away, because now silence is protection, space is healing, time is truth. And still, despite everything, there's a part of you that wants to believe again, that craves peace, that aches for honesty. That's what makes betrayal so tragic. It doesn't just take away someone. It takes away a part of you, a part you might never get back, or maybe you do, but it's never the same. It grows back with armor, with edges, with eyes that look for the exit. This isn't weakness. It's what survival looks like when the heart has been used as a weapon against itself. They told you forgiveness would set you free, that you needed to do it for your own peace, that holding on would turn you bitter, that letting go was the path forward, but they never asked what it cost you. They never asked what you had to swallow to even pretend to forgive someone who tore you apart with a straight face. It's easy to speak of forgiveness when you haven't been the one ripped open from the inside out. Forgiveness has been romanticized. It's been sold as this noble act that heals everything. But no one talks about what happens when you're expected to forgive before you're ready, when you're told to move on while your chest is still bleeding. That kind of forgiveness is not healing, it's suppression. It's forcing a smile over a scar that hasn't even closed yet. It teaches you to ignore your own pain so others can be more comfortable around you. There's a pressure in society to take the high road, to be the bigger person, but that road often feels like a tightrope walk over your own broken pieces. Forgiving too soon teaches your mind that your pain doesn't matter, that your voice should be silenced in the name of appearing strong. But true strength isn't found in pretending something didn't hurt. It's found in acknowledging it did and deciding what to do with that truth. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, and it shouldn't be used as a way to bypass accountability. When someone betrays you, they owe more than an apology. They owe recognition. They owe correction. They owe a willingness to understand the damage they've done. Without that, forgiveness is empty. It becomes a performance, a staged piece that leaves the real wound untouched. Psychologically, premature forgiveness can cause emotional dissonance. Your brain says something is still wrong, but your words say you're fine. That disconnect creates internal conflict. You suppress the anger, the confusion, the sadness, just to fit into a mold that wasn't made for you. Over time, that suppression builds into resentment, not relief. You don't let go, you bury. And buried pain always finds a way to surface through anxiety, mistrust, emotional shutdowns. You have every right to withhold forgiveness. That doesn't make you vengeful. It makes you honest. Forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. And choosing not to forgive, especially when the wound is fresh or never truly acknowledged, can be a form of self-respect. It's you telling yourself, I matter. My pain matters. What happened wasn't okay. That kind of validation is often the first real step toward healing. People confuse forgiveness with healing. They think they're the same, but they're not. Healing can happen without ever offering forgiveness. Sometimes healing looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like anger finally given a voice. Sometimes it's silence, not because you've moved on, but because you've accepted that the person who hurt you has no place in your recovery. You're not required to let them off the hook just to feel better. Holding people accountable isn't bitterness. It's fairness. It's justice. You don't have to forgive someone who showed no remorse. You don't have to forgive someone who repeated the same behavior over and over. You don't have to forgive someone who blamed you for what they did. That's not healing. That's gaslighting your own soul. In trauma recovery, it's common for therapists to advise against rushing forgiveness. Studies show that victims who are pressured into forgiving too soon actually struggle more with anxiety and depression. They feel invalidated. Their emotional truth gets pushed aside in favor of some moral high ground that doesn't reflect what they're going through. Real healing often begins with permission to be angry, to be hurt, and to sit in that discomfort without trying to erase it. Forgiveness should never be used as a weapon against yourself. If thinking about what they did still brings you pain, it means your heart is still processing. If your trust still feels broken, it means your boundaries are still recalibrating. You can heal without inviting them back in. You can rise without pretending they didn't knock you down. You can move forward without pretending to be over it. Not forgiving doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you're honoring your process. It means you're taking control of your story instead of letting others dictate when and how it should end. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remember what they did and decide never to let it happen again. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. You don't have to explain your choice to anyone. The people who urge you to forgive quickly are often the ones who can't handle your pain. It makes them uncomfortable. It confronts their need for tidy endings. But your pain isn't a performance for their peace. You're allowed to feel it, to hold it, to protect yourself with it. Not forever, but for as long as it takes to rebuild what they broke. In some cases, choosing not to forgive is the only way to draw a clear line. It says, this was wrong. This can't happen again. It puts up a boundary that says your self-worth doesn't allow repeated harm. Forgiveness without change isn't healing. It's enabling. It tells abusers that there are no real consequences, that they can come back whenever they want and find a door still open. But sometimes that door needs to stay locked, not out of spite, but for safety. There's also a myth that forgiveness equals peace. But for many, peace comes the moment they stop trying to forgive someone who never earned it. The moment they stop pouring energy into understanding someone who made a choice to hurt them. Peace comes when you finally tell yourself that your healing doesn't depend on their apology. That closure isn't always given. It's created. It's okay to feel like forgiveness isn't possible right now, or ever. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you honest with yourself. If the wound is still bleeding, don't force it shut. Let it breathe. Let it hurt. Let it teach you. Forgiveness, if it comes, should be real. And real forgiveness doesn't come from pressure. It comes from clarity, from emotional safety, from understanding that you've already survived the worst, and you didn't need to forgive them to do it. They told you to forget it, to let it go, to stop thinking about what happened, as if memory were a flaw, as if remembering the betrayal made you weak. But forgetting is not strength. Forgetting is erasure. It removes the lesson. It silences the warning, and it leaves you wide open for the same kind of pain to find you again. Memory is not your enemy. It's your map. It shows you where you've been hurt, who hurt you, and what it cost you. It doesn't keep you trapped. It keeps you informed. When you remember, you're not stuck. You're awake. You're aware of what patterns to avoid, what red flags to recognize, and what pieces of yourself you had to stitch back together. That awareness is survival. That's how you protect yourself the next time someone reaches for you with soft hands and hidden intentions. Pain has a strange way of sharpening the senses. After betrayal, your mind begins to track patterns you once ignored. You no longer hear just words. You hear tone, silence, hesitation. You stop being naive to convenience. You pay attention to inconsistencies. You stop justifying behavior that doesn't sit right in your gut. This isn't paranoia. This is your nervous system adapting. It remembers who made you feel small, who made you question your worth, and it refuses to let you walk blind again. People say time heals everything, but it's not time that heals. It's what you do with that time. Pain doesn't evaporate. It transforms. It becomes fuel. You start using it in ways you never imagined. Late nights that once were spent overthinking become hours of building, planning, strengthening. You lift with more intensity. You work with more focus. You move with purpose. Pain gives you a direction, away from what broke you and toward who you could be without it. There's a power in refusing to forget. It's not about holding a grudge. It's about holding the lesson. When you remember who you were before the betrayal, you also see how far you've come. The version of you that tolerated disrespect no longer exists. The version that explained themselves too much is gone. The one that stayed too long hoping they'd change has learned to walk away at the first crack in respect. You didn't just go through pain, you rebuilt your identity around it. The brain responds to emotional pain similarly to physical pain. When you burn your hand, your body remembers not to touch fire again. Emotional memory works the same way. Betrayal, neglect, manipulation. Your body keeps a record. It's not holding on to the pain to suffer. It's holding on to protect you, to remind you where your boundaries were crossed. That memory becomes instinct, and instinct, when sharpened by experience, becomes wisdom. Turning pain into power isn't just poetic. It's neurological. The prefrontal cortex, the decision-making center of your brain, becomes more engaged after trauma. You begin to operate more from logic than from blind trust. You become selective. You listen more than you speak. You don't rush into connections, you study them. And this isn't fear. This is calculated resilience. Pain becomes your filter. Not everyone gets access anymore. That's not bitterness. That's evolution. When you forget, you give the past permission to repeat itself. But when you remember, clearly, intentionally, without letting it poison you, you build a structure around your healing. You stop mistaking comfort for safety. You stop letting nostalgia rewrite reality. You stop telling yourself they didn't mean it when they clearly did. Memory brings clarity, and clarity leads to power. There's a moment after you've been broken where everything feels silent, number. You question your strength, but then something shifts. You remember the way they looked at you when they lied, the way they shrugged at your pain, the way you kept holding on when they already let go. And you get angry, not at them anymore, but at yourself. That anger isn't shame, it's fuel. It's the ignition switch that pushes you off the floor and into something harder, colder, smarter. You stop begging for peace and start building it yourself, quietly, without noise, without validation. Some scars never fade, and they're not supposed to. They're reminders. Proof that you felt something real and lived through it, that you were cut open and didn't die, that you bled and still stood. They remind you of how you survived the worst days and somehow are still standing. Scars are not weakness. They are armor, not decoration, but protection. They remind you what never to allow again. You stop wishing people were different. You stop hoping they'll apologize. You start thanking the pain for showing you the truth, for revealing people's true nature, for peeling off the mask and saving you years of illusion. You don't regret knowing the truth. You regret wasting your time not seeing it sooner. And that's why you refuse to forget. Because now, you see more clearly. There is a version of you that only exists because of what you went through. A version that's sharper, faster, colder, but not in a cruel way. In a calculated way. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself to anyone. You let your silence speak. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't explain. You observe, and if something feels wrong, you leave quietly, without warning, without guilt. People don't understand that healing isn't always warm. Sometimes healing is sharp. It cuts away who you were pretending to be. It removes the masks you wore to keep the peace. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that allowed the pain in the first place. That kind of healing is raw, but it's honest, and it's lasting. You didn't just survive the pain. You absorbed it, you studied it, you let it teach you. You didn't let it consume you, but you didn't deny it either. You carried it until it became muscle, until it became your threshold, and now you operate differently. You protect your peace like a soldier guards a post, not out of fear, but out of respect for what it cost to earn that peace in the first place. Not forgetting isn't about staying stuck in the past. It's about refusing to walk blindly into the same future. It's about honoring the pain enough to never repeat it. You use the memory not to reopen the wound, but to keep it from happening again. Pain is a teacher, and you've paid the tuition in full. There comes a time when silence says more than words ever could. A moment when disappearing is not an act of weakness, but of strategy. When walking away without a sound becomes the loudest thing you've ever done. It's not about ghosting, and it's not about running. It's about reclaiming the space that was once invaded, about removing access from those who misused it. When someone breaks your trust and you continue to make yourself available, you're offering them a front row seat to the damage they caused. But when you go silent, when you remove yourself from the picture entirely, they no longer get to see, influence, or control how you move forward. That silence becomes a wall, and behind it, you begin to rebuild. Becoming unreachable is not a sudden switch. It's a slow, intentional withdrawal. It starts with emotional distance. You stop explaining yourself. You stop trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering your energy where it's not reciprocated. Over time, the distance becomes physical. You answer less. You appear less. You let their messages sit unread. You let the silence stretch. And it's not pettiness, it's preservation. You realize that not everyone deserves a reply. Not every conflict deserves your energy. Some things are best left unanswered. Psychologically, becoming unreachable creates a power shift. When someone can no longer reach you, they lose control of the narrative. They're left to wonder what you're thinking, what you're doing, who you're becoming. And that uncertainty can be louder than any confrontation. People who manipulate rely on access. They need to be able to tap in and pull strings. They need to check your emotional temperature to know how far they can go. When you remove that access, you remove their grip. The moment they can no longer read you, they lose leverage. And in that silence, their own insecurities start to speak louder than anything you could say. Distance brings clarity, not just for them, but for you. When you're too close to the chaos, it's hard to see things clearly. The lies, the guilt trips, the subtle control, it all blends into something that feels like love but isn't. But when you step away, you start seeing patterns. You start remembering conversations and realizing what was really being said. You begin to identify manipulation that once felt like concern. You see that kindness was conditional, that support came with strings. You begin to separate what you wanted to see from what was actually there. When you become unreachable, you force people to sit with themselves without your presence to deflect onto, without your reactions to manipulate. They are left with only their reflection. For some, that silence will provoke guilt. For others, defensiveness. Either way, it disrupts their control. And for the first time, you stop being the emotionally responsible one. You stop carrying the burden of fixing everything, of explaining yourself, of managing their reactions. Your absence makes them feel what your presence used to absorb. There's a reason emotional abusers fear distance, because distance equals detachment, and detachment is dangerous for them. It means you're no longer emotionally tied to their approval, their validation, or their guilt. It means you're thinking for yourself, living for yourself, choosing peace over chaos, even if it's lonely at first. And once you reach that point, there's no going back. Not because you're angry, but because you've tasted the freedom of no longer needing them. That kind of mental and emotional autonomy is priceless.
Becoming unreachable also disrupts trauma bonds. These are psychological chains formed through cycles of affection and pain, love and harm. When you're caught in them, leaving feels like withdrawal. Your nervous system is wired to crave the highs and survive the lows. But going no contact, disappearing, breaking the pattern, that's what starts to heal the addiction. It's painful. At first it feels like something vital is missing, but slowly, your brain starts to regulate. Your body begins to settle. You stop waiting for their approval. You stop needing their recognition. The silence becomes familiar, then comfortable, then essential.
There's also strength in the unknown. When they can no longer predict your next move, they can't prepare their next manipulation. They can't mirror you to keep you hooked. They can't guilt you into re-engagement. You no longer play the role they assigned you. You've stepped out of their narrative. And that shift is terrifying for someone who depends on control. The less they know, the more they wonder. And wondering creates tension. It forces them to confront a reality without you in it. One where they no longer have the power to affect your mood, your choices, your peace. From a psychological standpoint, silence is often more powerful than confrontation. When you argue, when you try to explain, you're still participating. You're still offering access to your thoughts, emotions, and energy. But silence takes all of that away. It says, I'm done speaking, I'm done explaining, I'm done reacting. That kind of restraint requires strength. It's not passive, it's calculated. It's not weak, it's controlled. You stop playing defense. You stop playing at all. Being unreachable doesn't mean isolating yourself from the world. It means choosing who gets access, who gets your time, your thoughts, your vulnerability. It means drawing a hard line and defending it, not with anger, but with indifference. Not with revenge, but with distance. You can forgive someone and still not let them in. You can heal without giving them updates. You owe no one a seat at your table just because they once sat there. And this choice, this decision to become unreachable, is not just for them, it's for you. It gives you space to grow without pressure, to evolve without being watched, to process without interruption. There's something sacred about building in silence, about healing in the shadows, where no one's expectations shape your progress. You get to find your own rhythm again, your own values, your own voice. It also rewires how you see yourself. For so long, your worth might have been tied to how needed you were, how available, how accommodating. But being unreachable flips that. It teaches you that value doesn't come from being constantly accessible. It comes from knowing your worth even when no one is clapping. It comes from creating a life that no longer revolves around proving anything to anyone. This distance, this silence, it teaches you boundaries. You stop explaining them. You start enforcing them without guilt, without second guessing. Because now you understand what it costs to keep doors open for people who only walk in to take. You realize that love without respect isn't love, that attention without consistency isn't connection, that access without trust is a liability. Not everyone deserves to know you anymore. Not everyone deserves updates on your healing, your wins, or your growth. Some people should only know that they lost access. That's it. No explanations. No farewells, just absence, a quiet, powerful statement that says, I'm no longer available to be used, to be manipulated, to be broken and blamed for it. This isn't about proving a point. It's about protecting your energy, reclaiming your peace. You're not punishing anyone. You're preserving yourself. And in that act, quiet, strong, unshakable, you become something they never expected, untouchable, unreachable, unbothered. And that, in the end, is the ultimate power move. There are things you start doing after you've been hurt, Things that aren't taught but learned the hard way. Psychological survival isn't a skill you read about in a book. It comes from nights you couldn't sleep, from conversations that left you shaking, from trusting the wrong people and watching them twist your words, your kindness, your presence. After enough pain, your mind stops focusing on fairness. It starts focusing on protection. It builds a new system, not for connection but for survival. Not to open, but to shield. One of the first things you learn is emotional detachment. You stop reacting to everything. You stop answering right away. You pause more. You say less. At first, it feels like you're becoming cold. You question if you're shutting down too much. But what you're really doing is learning how to control the space between stimulus and response. You're learning that not every message needs a reply. Not every confrontation deserves energy. That silence, sometimes, is a stronger response than anger. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you no longer feel. It means you stop handing out access to your emotions like it's free. People who used to pull reactions out of you suddenly meet a wall. And that wall isn't cruelty, it's consequence. You've learned how much it costs to give your emotional energy to someone who only uses it against you. You've learned that some people feed off your hurt, and the best way to starve them is by going still, calm, unreadable. Another survival tactic is mental distance. You may be in the same room, the same call, the same thread, but you're not really there. You've trained your mind to detach from the noise. When someone starts spinning the same cycle, blame, guilt, manipulation, you don't absorb it like you used to. Your brain puts up a filter. You start hearing it for what it is, a pattern, not a truth. You no longer confuse emotional intensity for emotional intimacy. You know better now. You also develop a heightened sense of observation. You pick up on tone changes, micro-expressions, inconsistencies. Things others overlook become loud to you. It's not that you're paranoid. It's that you've been conditioned to notice the red flags that almost destroyed you before. Your survival system is always scanning, always checking for signs that something's off, that someone isn't who they pretend to be. It's tiring, but it's necessary. Trust isn't given easily anymore. It's earned over time through consistency, not words. Boundaries become your shield. You set limits where there used to be doors wide open. You no longer justify saying no. You stop explaining why you don't answer calls at midnight or why you walked away from a familiar face. Your boundaries stop being polite. They become firm, unshakable, because you've learned that people who get offended by your boundaries were usually the ones who benefited from you not having any. And when you begin enforcing those lines, it becomes clear who was really there for you and who was there for access. Another mental tactic is self-validation. You stop waiting for someone to say you're enough. You stop chasing their approval. That used to be your weakness, trying to prove your worth, trying to be chosen. Now you know better. You remind yourself of your value quietly. You look in the mirror and you don't need applause. You need clarity. You begin measuring progress by your peace, not by how many people like you or want you back. Survivors of betrayal often become extremely self-aware. You replay situations not to punish yourself, but to understand your own blind spots. You become honest with yourself about the roles you played, where you stayed too long, where you ignored your gut. But instead of shaming yourself, you use that knowledge to grow. You don't want to repeat the same pain. You begin rebuilding your inner world, not from guilt, but from understanding. One of the most difficult parts is unlearning the habit of over-explaining. You used to feel the need to make people understand your intentions, your pain, your reasons. Now, you say less. You've realized that people who want to misunderstand you will do it, no matter how clearly you speak. And those who care don't need every detail. You give your truth once. If they twist it, you don't correct it anymore. You simply pull back. Their misunderstanding becomes their problem, not your burden. Control over your reactions becomes your superpower. The old version of you reacted fast, out of pain, out of confusion, out of the need to defend yourself. But now you pause, you wait, you assess. You no longer react just because someone expects it. You hold your response like a weapon and choose when or if to use it. That calmness can be mistaken for indifference, but it's not. It's mastery. It's the result of knowing how much it cost to react to the wrong people before. You become less available emotionally, not because you don't care, but because caring too much nearly broke you. Now you reserve that depth for those who earn it, for those who show up without games, for those who don't make love feel like a puzzle. Your emotional availability becomes sacred, selective, and that's not selfish. That's self-respect. That's survival. There's also a shift in your internal dialogue. You stop calling yourself stupid for trusting. You stop saying, "I should have known." Instead, you start saying, "I've learned." You reframe your story. You weren't naive. You were open. You weren't weak. You were loyal. You weren't broken. You were just targeted by someone who saw your kindness as an opportunity. That shift in how you speak to yourself becomes part of your healing. It's how you start building strength from the same place you were once torn down.
Your priorities change. Peace starts mattering more than connection. Solitude starts feeling safer than company. You stop chasing temporary comfort and start building long-term security, mentally, emotionally, even physically. You pull away from chaos without needing closure. You let go of people without needing a dramatic ending. You realize that not all exits need announcements. Some are just quiet steps back that become permanent over time. The mind, once exposed to betrayal or emotional abuse, learns to build defense layers. These are not walls to shut the world out. They are filters. Not everyone gets through. Not everyone should. You stop romanticizing potential. You focus on patterns. Consistency becomes more important than charm. Actions weigh more than words. And you trust behavior more than promises. You start practicing mental stillness. You no longer rush to fill the silence. You allow the discomfort to speak. You sit with your own thoughts without needing to escape them. That kind of presence takes time to build. But once you have it, you realize how powerful it is. You're no longer chasing distractions. You're no longer running from yourself. You're right here, present, aware, guarded, but not bitter, strong, but not numb. That balance is the true form of survival. What people see as detachment is actually discipline. What they call cold is control. What they interpret as ego is boundaries. You're not who you used to be, and that's the point. You learned the hard way. You adapted. You protected yourself, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself first. The hardest work often happens in silence. After everything falls apart, trust, connection, your own sense of self, there's a period where it feels like nothing is happening. People don't see what you're doing. You're not posting your progress, not explaining your healing, not announcing your every step. But something real is shifting beneath the surface. There's no applause, no recognition, just quiet effort, day after day. That's where the rebuilding begins. Growth in the shadows is different. It's slower, heavier, more deliberate. You're not growing to be seen. You're growing to survive, to change, to become someone you trust again. And that kind of growth doesn't look impressive from the outside. There are no celebrations, no milestones to show off. It looks like disappearing from places you used to be loud in. It looks like unlearning behaviors you thought were love. It feels like pulling yourself out of a version of life that broke you and choosing not to explain why. People think silence means weakness, that absence means defeat. But silence is often the loudest decision a person can make. It means you're focusing on yourself, not the image of yourself. It means you're taking care of your wounds, not parading around pretending they don't exist. You're learning how to breathe again, how to walk without limping emotionally, how to function without begging for understanding. The world is noisy. People measure progress by visibility. If they can't see it, they assume it doesn't exist. But the most permanent growth happens when no one is watching. You start waking up with clearer thoughts. You begin recognizing what triggers you. You stop reaching out to people who made you question your worth. You remove yourself from cycles that used to drain you. Every small shift matters. Every quiet win adds up. You begin building a structure of self-respect, brick by brick, word by word, thought by thought. You may lose people during this phase, people who are attached to your brokenness, those who liked you better when you were more available, more forgiving, more easy to reach. Your silence disturbs them because they can't figure out if you're healing, planning, or done with them. The truth is, you're doing all three, and that makes them uncomfortable. When you rebuild quietly, you break the narratives others had about you. You stop being predictable. You stop being accessible. That's when the power starts shifting. There's something sacred about evolving without witnesses. You don't owe anyone updates. You don't need to explain your disappearance. If they were part of the pain, they don't get to be part of the healing. You change your number. You walk new paths. You read different things. You listen to silence more than noise. You reflect more than react. You build not for approval, but for protection. Every decision becomes more intentional, every boundary tighter, every standard higher. When you're rebuilding in private, it's not about hiding, it's about protecting the process. Growth, when constantly watched, becomes performative. You start doing things to prove a point, instead of doing them because they matter to you. In the shadows, there's no audience. You can fall, rise, fall again without judgment. You can feel your pain without softening it for others. You can set goals that no one knows about and change directions without having to explain yourself. Psychologically, quiet growth allows for clearer introspection. You're not filtering your healing through social validation. You're not measuring progress by how others perceive you. You're looking inward. You're processing your trauma on your terms. Studies in behavioral psychology show that lasting change is more effective when it's internally motivated and not driven by outside approval. When you rebuild alone, the identity you create is yours, not something you curated to be palatable to others. You start becoming more selective with your time. You're no longer available for every invitation. You start valuing rest over chaos, peace over noise, depth over entertainment. You may feel isolated, but that isolation becomes fertile ground for transformation. In that quiet space, you can identify what actually matters to you, who adds value, what habits destroy your focus, what routines build your strength. This is where the foundation is laid, not in the spotlight, but in silence. The transformation isn't loud. It shows up in how you don't react to disrespect anymore, in how you say no without guilt, in how you stop chasing answers from people who never gave you truth, in how you sit alone without feeling lonely, in how you look back at the chaos you once called normal and feel nothing but distance. Not anger, not nostalgia, just clarity. You don't need anyone to clap for your progress. The applause was never the goal. What you're building now is stability, control over your thoughts, mastery over your emotions, a routine that keeps you grounded, relationships that don't drain you, self-respect that isn't up for debate, These aren't things you can show off in a post or package into a highlight reel. These are things only you know are changing. You start holding yourself to higher standards, not out of pressure, but out of pride. You look back at the person you were, and you feel a quiet sense of loyalty, not to stay the same, but to not let that version of you suffer again. You owe it to the version of you who cried without answers, who begged for closure, who stayed too long. You rebuild to honor them, to never be that powerless again. The world may think you disappeared, that you faded, but really, you were in the lab, reconstructing, shedding layers, training your mind, teaching your heart to beat on its own again. When you return, you won't be louder. You'll be sharper, quieter, but undeniable. Not because you sought validation, but because the changes are real, grounded, rooted in discipline and self-awareness. You'll find that people who once underestimated you suddenly pay attention, but you won't need their recognition anymore. You'll be beyond needing it, because when you rebuild in the shadows, your foundation becomes so solid that their praise or absence makes no difference. You won't need to prove anything. You'll know what it took to get there, and that quiet knowing will be louder than anything they could say. The world respects results, but you'll respect the silence it took to create them even more, and that silence will stay with you, not as isolation, but as power. You didn't rebuild for anyone else. You did it for the peace that lives in your bones now, for the clarity in your decisions, for the strength in your boundaries, and for the life you're now creating. Calm, real, untouchable. Power doesn't always come from speaking. Sometimes it comes from restraint, from being the one who could react, but chooses not to. In a world where people are constantly reacting, constantly proving, constantly defending, the one who remains still holds the strongest position. Emotional mastery begins the moment you stop giving others access to your reactions. You stop being predictable. You stop letting them pull you into their chaos. That silence, that calm, that stillness, it becomes your weapon. Power dynamics shift the second you control your emotions instead of letting others control them for you. If someone can push a button and get the same reaction every time, they own you. Whether it's anger, guilt, sadness, or neediness, once someone knows how to provoke you, they know how to steer you. Emotional mastery is about removing those buttons, disarming the triggers. It's not about being numb. It's about being disciplined. It's about choosing your response, not surrendering to it. People are unsettled by what they can't read. When you stop giving emotional feedback, they don't know where they stand with you. They can't gauge your thoughts. They can't plan their next move based on your energy. This silence becomes uncomfortable for them. The ones who relied on your emotional availability start to feel lost. And in that discomfort, the power shifts. You're no longer reacting to their world. They're trying to figure out how to fit into yours. Absence becomes louder than presence when it's intentional. When someone is used to having your attention, your replies, your concern, and you suddenly go silent, they feel it like a void. People remember how you made them feel. If you once gave warmth, care, empathy, and then you take that away, not out of spite, but out of preservation, it leaves a mark. They may not say it, but they feel it. That energy withdrawal is deafening. It forces them to reflect on what they lost access to. There's something intimidating about someone who no longer needs to argue, who no longer seeks validation, who doesn't need closure, who can walk away and remain silent even while chaos unfolds around them. That silence speaks louder than any speech. It's the behavior of someone who has seen enough, someone who knows their value, someone who doesn't beg to be understood. This kind of detachment isn't built overnight. It's forged through disappointment, through patterns of being too open, too generous with your emotions, too willing to explain yourself to people who never really listened. After a while, you stop overcommitting. You stop rescuing people from the consequences of their actions. You stop making yourself smaller just to maintain peace. And when you stop doing all of that, people begin to take notice. Not because you shouted, but because you stopped speaking. Controlled detachment doesn't mean you care less. It means you've learned how to care differently, strategically, quietly, from a distance. It means you've stopped handing out the most vulnerable parts of yourself to people who've shown they can't be trusted with them. Your love becomes guarded. Your empathy becomes intentional. Your trust becomes rare. And in that rarity lies value. Psychologists have long studied the power of emotional regulation. It's a critical part of high emotional intelligence. People who can regulate their internal state, especially in moments of stress, confrontation, or betrayal, are less likely to be manipulated, more likely to succeed in high-pressure environments, and more equipped to lead. Emotional mastery is not about suppression. It's about management. You feel everything. You just no longer let everything control you. That's what makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability is powerful. In power dynamics, the person who is emotionally consistent and reserved is often the one with the upper hand, while others spiral, overshare, explode, or try to provoke a response. You stay grounded. You stay calculated. People who try to get a rise out of you begin to feel powerless. They realize their tactics no longer work, that your silence is not confusion, it's confidence. There is fear in your absence, not because you threaten, but because you refuse to chase. That refusal breaks patterns. It teaches people that your attention is not guaranteed, that your kindness is not endless, that your presence is not permanent. You're not playing a game. You're living in alignment with your worth. And people who only knew how to function when they had emotional leverage over you begin to panic when they lose it. Respect is born when boundaries are enforced consistently, when people know that once you're done, that you don't repeat yourself, that you don't negotiate self-worth, that you don't beg. This isn't about revenge or ego. It's about discipline. You've reached a place where you don't need to be loud. You don't need to defend your absence. You don't need to explain why you stopped showing up. Your actions speak, and they say everything. People mistake emotional control for coldness, but coldness is emptiness. Control is power. Coldness is detachment from life. Control is engagement with awareness. You still feel, you still care, but now you decide who gets access. That's not being cold, that's being wise. There is power in knowing when to speak and when to walk away, when to respond and when to be silent, when to give and when to stop. It's not about turning off your emotions. It's about turning them inward first, processing them on your terms, responding when you're ready, not when someone demands it. That's what changes the dynamic. They can no longer push you into reacting. You stop being emotionally available to drama. You stop attending every argument you're invited to. You stop showing up for people who only call you when they want something. You stop handing out pieces of yourself in exchange for temporary validation. You become the one in control, not of them, but of yourself. And that kind of control is rare. It commands attention. It commands respect. It commands caution. Because now they know. They can't predict you. They can't provoke you. and they can't replace you. Your absence haunts more than your presence ever could. Not because of what you did, but because of what you refused to do. You refused to stay. You refused to explain. You refused to let them see you break again. And that silence, that distance, that emotional strength wrapped in calm expression, that's not cold, that's power. They called you cold, distant, changed, and maybe they're right, but not in the way they think. You didn't wake up one morning and choose to become this version of yourself. You were shaped by experience, by pain that left bruises no one else could see. You were once soft, open, willing. You led with warmth, offered understanding even when you were hurting. But that softness was taken advantage of. And when enough doors slammed, when enough lies were spoken with calm faces, you stopped offering parts of yourself to people who never deserved them. Becoming cold wasn't a decision. It was a response, a survival mechanism. The world didn't give you the space to be fragile, so you stopped expecting it. You stopped apologizing for being guarded. It wasn't bitterness that made you shift. It was reality. And when reality becomes harsh enough, emotions learn to take a back seat. You no longer wear your heart on your sleeve. You tuck it somewhere safe, out of reach, because you've seen what happens when the wrong hands get too close. People mistake this version of you for being heartless, but it's not that you don't feel. It's that you don't express it the way you used to. The volume's turned down. The floodgates are locked. You've learned that emotional expression in the wrong environment becomes ammunition. So now you think before you speak. You wait before you react. You protect your peace like it's currency, because for too long it was stolen without your permission. There's a difference between being emotionally cold and emotionally numb. Numbness is detachment from yourself. Coldness is a defense. It's being fully aware, fully present, but refusing to let anyone near the parts of you that are still healing. It's moving through life with precision, not impulsivity. You analyze, you calculate, you listen more than you talk. You speak only when the words matter. That kind of self-control is not the absence of feeling. It's the result of discipline. You've seen what happens when emotions run wild, when your love is taken for granted, when your kindness becomes expected. You've lived through the manipulation of people who only show up when they want something. So you stopped showing up first. You stopped giving answers to people who never earned the right to question you. Your silence is not empty. It's full of meaning. It's your way of choosing yourself without having to justify it to anyone. Psychologically, emotional control is a sign of strength. Studies show that those who can regulate their feelings under stress, who can stay calm in chaos, are not suppressing emotions. They're mastering them. This level of emotional intelligence takes time to build. It doesn't happen after one betrayal or one bad experience. It comes after repeated lesson, after patterns become too obvious to ignore, after you realize that being too available emotionally makes you vulnerable to people who weaponize connection. The coldness that others notice now is not a flaw. It's armor. You still love, but you love selectively. You still care, but your care is earned. You've become intentional. Your standards are higher, your tolerance lower. You're not rude, you're resolved. Not aggressive, just aware. You've learned that peace isn't found in keeping everyone close. It's found in keeping the wrong ones out. They say you've changed, that you're not as open as you used to be. What they don't see is that you're still open, just not to chaos, not to liars, not to manipulators who pretend they care until it stops benefiting them. You're not closed off. You're refined. You know what energy feels safe now. You recognize sincerity. And when you don't feel it, you walk away, not with drama, but with quiet certainty. You no longer beg to be understood. You no longer chase closure. You've learned that some people will never admit the damage they've caused, that some situations don't need a final conversation. They need a firm ending, and that ending came not through loud goodbyes, but through silent withdrawal, through a decision to no longer participate in your own suffering. This version of you, sharper, quieter, more discerning, isn't broken. It's rebuilt. It's the result of choosing to live in a world that isn't always kind, without letting it destroy you completely. You're still standing, not because you avoided pain, but because you refused to let it define you. You've been burned and kept walking. That doesn't make you cold. That makes you unbreakable. You're not here to prove your softness. You're here to protect your soul. You're not here to rescue everyone. You're here to guard your energy. You've finally accepted that not everyone deserves access. Not everyone deserves your story. Not everyone gets a second chance to hurt you the same way. And that acceptance doesn't come from hatred. It comes from wisdom. You're still capable of love, of kindness, of warmth. But now, you give those things with awareness, with standards. You no longer pour into empty cups. You no longer stay in rooms where you have to shrink. That's not coldness. That's growth. You haven't lost your heart. You've just decided who's allowed to hold it. They tried to break you quietly. Thought if they hurt you in silence, you'd disappear the same way. But you're still here. Not because they let you be, but because you decided to stay standing. You carried wounds no one could see, walked through fire while pretending you felt no heat. And now, they say you've changed. What they don't understand is that change wasn't a choice. It was survival. You were never meant to stay soft in a world that kept cutting you with the very things you once held sacred. You learned. You adapted. You became the storm they never saw coming. There's a different kind of power in silence. A kind that doesn't seek attention, but commands it. You're not the same person who begged for answers, who waited on apologies that never came, who explained yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That version of you died the moment you realized peace is more valuable than closure. The moment you stopped chasing validation and started building in private. You didn't heal to be liked. You healed to be untouchable, to never again hand your worth to someone too careless to hold it. This is your call to power, not to be louder, but to be clearer, not to prove anything, but to protect everything. You owe it to the broken version of you, the one who kept going despite betrayal, despite exhaustion, despite not knowing if it would ever get better. You don't owe anyone a warning. You don't owe them access to your healing. You owe yourself silence where there used to be chaos, boundaries where there used to be begging, strength where there used to be shame. They will wonder how you got so quiet, so hard to read, so distant. Let them. They were loud when they were breaking you. Now your silence will echo louder than anything they said. There's no need for revenge. There's no need for anger. There is only purpose. Controlled, steady, focused purpose. That's what makes them uncomfortable. Not what you say, but what you've stopped saying. Not what you post, but what you've removed. You became the question they can't answer. Now is not the time to soften. Now is the time to rise. Not with noise, but with weight. With calm power. with that look in your eyes that says you've already decided who you are. They didn't build this version of you. They built the pain that made this version necessary. And you, quiet, unreachable, unshaken, you turned it into fire. Let it burn everything that tried to contain you. You were not meant to be understood. You were meant to be remembered.